this virtual event on small businesses and net zero. My name is Ed Burkitt, and I'm Head of Energy and Environment here at Policy Exchange. We're here today because the UK's commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 will impact the whole economy. In this event, the panel will explore the challenges and opportunities for small businesses as the economy transitions to lower carbon technologies, such as electric vehicles, lower carbon heating systems, sustainable supply chains, and more. I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel. We have Andrew Griffith MP, the Member of Parliament for Arundel and South Downs. In the run-up to the COP26 climate conference last year, he was the UK's net zero business champion. We're also joined by Martin McTague, who is the National Vice Chair for Policy and Advocacy at the Federation of Small Businesses, the FSB. And finally, we have Eva-Maria Kirschsieper, who is the Director of Sustainability Policy for Europe, the Middle East and Africa at Meta. And Policy Exchange would like to thank Meta for kindly sponsoring this event. To start, I'm going to ask each of the panellists for their views on the challenges and opportunities that net zero brings for small businesses. We will then have a panel discussion, followed by a question and answer session with our virtual audience. If you're watching via the Zoom webinar and you want to ask a question, then please raise your virtual hand and we'll come to you when we get to the question and answer session. So let's kick off. Andrew, I'll come to you first. At COP26, we heard a lot about what large businesses were doing on net zero. But what do you see as the role for smaller businesses in this?
Well, thank you, Ed. And it's always a delight and a pleasure to be hosted by Policy Exchange, which has always brought some of the leading thinkers to come and talk about some of the most important issues of the day. And obviously, this is absolutely this. For any of us in business, and my background is in business, I'm relatively new to this role that I'm in now, and the world of net zero. This is the transition of our generation. I mean, I often liken this to digital, in that the path to the low carbon economy is going to throw up huge opportunities. It will be disruptive. For small businesses, that makes a great opportunity because small businesses, as I'm sure Martin will endorse, tend to be some of the most dynamic. The businesses that can move first when things change. And clearly, some of the small businesses today that operate in this low carbon space or are providing solutions are going to be very large businesses in the future. And that's incredibly important as we try to build a dynamic, science-based superpower economy that seeks to make the most advantages of the green industrial revolution. We did see small businesses at the Global Climate Summit in Glasgow. There was a good presence. One can always do more. And one of the challenges and the headwinds that we see in the small business community, which make up the vast majority of businesses by number and employ the majority of employees, is I know how time limited those businesses are. The high opportunity cost on the time of the founder, the entrepreneur, the leaders in those businesses. And I'm very conscious of all of the other things that small businesses have been dealing with. We're still not out of the woods on COVID, although thanks to the boosters, that's looking better by the day. And of course, there's other headwinds, the global supply chain crisis that in turn is having an impact on some of the short-term costs that those businesses face. So there's always a lot going on. I would urge small businesses to engage in this. There are an increasing number of places that you can go to get support mostly to find out more. I think the challenge with small businesses is often finding out what's there. It's a big domain. It's easy if you're a big business. You've got a sustainability department. You've got procurement departments. You can crunch through this. Much harder for small businesses to know where to start. The initiatives of organizations like Meta, many others as well, and like the FSB, are increasingly bringing together domains where you can get help, you can get advice, you can start to research solutions. And Ed, that is how we are going to tackle the opportunity of the transition to the low carbon world in exactly the same way that we have in the past, using the ferocious problem-solving power of business, unleashing entrepreneurs in the economy. The role of government is to try and support that, to sketch out, and this is what I think the Prime Minister's done very well, with things like the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution and the net zero strategy, is to sketch out those long-term goals, the long-term demand curves. But there's also a point where you have to look to that capacity in business to bring forward solutions and to do the heavy lifting from here to there. So I'll leave that there if I may, Ed. You asked me to keep my opening remarks short, and there's some points there that I'd be very happy to come back on. It's not without its challenges, but I'm very firmly, both from a government perspective, from the UK in terms of how we compete in a global world going forward, but most of all from a business perspective, that this is more on the opportunity side of the ledger than it is the challenges which we will together overcome.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. And as you say, plenty for us to come back to in our panel discussion. Martin, you work with small businesses every day. What are their priorities in this area?
Well, the priorities for many of them are survival right now because, you know, they've gone through a pretty tough patch over the COVID crisis. But one thing's absolutely certain, they are critical to reaching the net zero targets. I think most measures, people assess them at about 35% of the carbon emissions from business are coming from small businesses. And we were surprised when we surveyed that there is a really big pool of goodwill out there within small businesses, with the majority defining it as a climate crisis and are prepared to do their bit. But I think the problem is that most of them just say, well, I need more information. I'm not really sure. There's a real sense of goodwill, but what do I do next? One of the starting points is, how can I measure my carbon footprint? And I think a lot of the ways of measuring it are quite clunky. But as Andrew says, I think there will be a lot of innovation in this area. And I can see some really clever ideas coming to the forefront where you can use clever software to measure your carbon footprint and target those areas you can work on. But one thing we've got to avoid is treating this as something that's almost like an extension of an audit. We've got to treat it more as an opportunity, not a threat. And I think one of those opportunities that was missed was when the government brought out the heat and building strategy recently. There were billions of pounds worth of small business opportunities buried in that report. And yet in the whole report, there was only 3 mentions of SMEs. And I think government needs to realize that on something as big as transforming the way we heat buildings, that SMEs are absolutely key to the solution. If you look at something like heat pumps, it's pretty clear that although the ambitions are very big, 600,000 heat pumps a year, there is a bit of a market failure going on at the moment. And unless you lower the risk for entry for a lot of SMEs, that market is going to stall at its current level. Now, what we've suggested is a way of overcoming all this is probably in 2 areas. Government can help with what I think would be something akin to the help to grow, but we would call it help to green, providing the skills and advice that people can get real solutions to how they can attack their carbon footprint. And then we'd like to see green finance change. So free the banks from some of the Basel III restrictions. That should be possible now we're outside the EU. And arrange for losses that businesses are investing, when they're investing in the early stages of these low carbon technologies, to be written off at the same rate as the gains that they're taxed. So I think that would send out a very clear signal to small businesses that this is not just something they need to worry about, but a real opportunity.
Great, thanks, Martin, and also a lot to come back to there. Eva, what's your view on this?
Yes, thanks so much for having me today. Maybe I can begin with some general remarks about what we're doing here as Meta and why we're engaged. Of course, as probably most of the other businesses, we recognize the urgency of climate change, and we are absolutely committed to help tackle this global challenge. So over the past years, we have shifted to not just work toward reducing our own emissions, which we successfully achieved, but we also moved our ambition toward leveraging our platform in the service of addressing the climate crisis. So operational, we have made great strides over the past years. Just some highlights. We've achieved net zero emissions for our global operations in 2020, including 100% renewable energy for all of our data centers and offices. We set a net zero goal for our global value chain to achieve in 2030, and we also set an ambitious water positive goal to achieve by 2030. But that said, we want to do more than just operate sustainably, and we know that SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, are the backbone of the UK economy and often the lifeblood of communities online and offline, and we are deeply invested in supporting them. We are very proud that our platform currently enables SMEs to power sales, grow quickly, and also compete effectively on a global scale. Just two numbers. More than 3 million businesses across the UK use our platforms and the free tools that we provide to connect with customers locally, nationally, but also globally. And indeed, there are 375 people worldwide connected to UK businesses through our platform. So we see our role to work with these SMBs using our platforms over the past years from an economic, but as well from a sustainability perspective. So last year in November, I believe, we kicked off our so-called Green Boost program. Actually, we kicked it off initially in the UK around COP26. And Green Boost is the evolution of our traditional SMB Boost program, which we have refined with adding a significant sustainability layer that helps SMBs grow their businesses sustainably while also reducing their carbon footprint. We are working, for example, with SME Climate Hub and partners across Europe. We have created a number of trainings and resources to help SMBs, currently in 3 areas. We focused on restaurants, on hospitality, and on the food production industries to grow their business sustainably. We picked those as they are also some of the most affected by the COVID crisis. So we want to empower SMBs to take climate action. We want them to benefit from green trends and to rebuild their businesses for a sustainable future. And those trainings are focused on practical tips and actions to bring down the CO2 emissions tailored to the restaurants, hospitality, and the food producing industries. And I'm proud to say that just for the UK and Spain, where we've launched initially, where we launched this program, so far we have reached more than 1.5 million SMEs across those 2 countries alone. I want to leave it there and happy to discuss further what else we can do beyond that.
Great, thanks, Eva. And I want to just come to Martin and something you mentioned there, Eva, about practical tips and practical steps for businesses. Martin, what are some of the practical things that businesses are already doing? And you know, what is the low-hanging fruit here that can make a big difference on emissions?
Well, those that are, I mean, the split in SME population is roughly thirds, right? With about 20%, I would say, are the sort of climate warriors that are already taking steps and have already reduced their energy consumption. They don't need much of an incentive to do that because they're already highly motivated. There are a 20% who are roughly almost climate deniers, who I don't think anything would shift them off their very skeptical position. But that leaves a good 60% who are available and interested and willing to be persuaded that this could be a good thing for their business. Some of them are taking quite small steps to make reductions in their energy consumption, fitting smart meters, buying electric vehicles and so on. But the majority need a lot more information if they're going to take the next step.
Okay, and Andrew, I guess maybe come to you on that point on the electric vehicles point here. There's sort of the push factor of electric vehicles in some of the regulations that the government's putting in, and cities like London and Birmingham doing clean air charges, and then there's just the experience is potentially better for some businesses. Where do you think we are on the EV transition, and in your discussions with business, what are the key things that they've been telling you about in relation to EVs?
Well, in macro terms, we're still very early days, but the metrics are very good. One of my businesses was transitioning analog to digital. I mean, it took a long time. We mustn't forget these things don't have to happen overnight. That transition took over 15 years, but it was very successful and created new markets along the way. The supply chain for electric vehicles is forming nicely now. There are lots of, one of the barriers originally was the supply of commercial vehicles. So it started with, automotive cars, and for a long time, you couldn't really get a range of commercial vehicles that businesses typically need. That piece of supply chain is now being filled in. And we know that, consumers, it overweights. So it has an important sort of nudge value in that it overweights prominence in consumers' minds. So if you are a small business, and most small businesses are actually quite micro businesses, maybe they're operating, out of a single van. If you make the switch to an electric vehicle, then you can do a lot, not as a greenwashing exercise, but in terms of, demonstrating that your business is taking sustainability and the transition to low carbon seriously. So I always think that's one of the more accessible ways for people to get onto this. You don't have to know your carbon footprint, as Martin says. That's quite a. It's not esoteric, but that's quite a heavy lifting exercise. Making some of the simple steps, like swapping out your next vehicle for an electric vehicle, offering your employees the chance to, drive and charge to work if you've got employees in parking spaces, or have a secure cycle storage. On this journey, there are lots of. I mean, I always think of it as the aggregation of marginal gains, right? I mean, if you start to think of it as a really big, transition that has to be achieved in an impossibly short period of time and impacting every domain of your business overnight, then of course it feels very scary and intimidating. If you start to think of what are the simple steps I can take, break it down to your household economics. Where am I spending money on transport costs? What can I do in the transport domain? Are there any opportunities to source more locally? Technology is a great friend there. I've got many, I represent a business that's replete with brilliant small businesses, often in things like the hospitality industry. The lockdown and the combination of firms like Meta, mean that people were finding for the first time suppliers, often in the next town or village, that were replacing supply chains that often extended across the world. So there's lots of small, simple steps that people can take.
Thanks, Andrew. And Eva, are you finding that businesses are sort of using any of their sustainability measures as a marketing tool to differentiate themselves from the competition?
Well, yeah, that can be one area, of course. And there's a variety of things that people can do. They can market and the brand of being more sustainable. That's certainly the one thing. And we do have some very good examples of SMBs who do that. But then there's also obviously the way to within our program to understand what they actually can do, because it is, as I think it's been mentioned before, it's an opportunity. It's not only something that companies should be doing, but that there's a benefit in doing so. And the marketing piece may be one side of it, but then there's also actually the benefit that those companies may be seeing by addressing those areas. Maybe just one company that I would like to highlight from Northern Ireland, for example. It's a SMB that lives or uses our platform. It's called Farm Next Door, and it's a plastic-free fruit and vegetable company that is providing delivery of locally grown products from local farmers to the customers' doorsteps. And they, for example, they were able to hire 8 new employees that they attributed to their advertising and their engagement on Facebook. So it is marketing being green, but it's also marketing your green products and finding new customers for your green businesses.
Great, thanks. I have a couple of other areas I'd like to dive into before we take questions from the audience, but please do raise your hands on Zoom and we'll come to you at the appropriate time. I think maybe some of you alluded to some of the challenges around COVID, and now we've got energy bills going up. I just wonder whether that creates less space for small businesses in particular to think about their carbon footprint, and whether that's something that concerns yourself. So Martin, maybe I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, it is a major concern because some businesses that have come through the pandemic in a pretty weak state are now facing a big hike in prices. And that, for them, that pushes down any attempts to sort of lower their carbon footprint down the agenda. However, I've seen people that are really enthusiastic about the change, you know, and to go back to what was talked about earlier, they want to invest in electric vehicles, but they struggle with the idea that if they do that, well, what would happen if I installed a charging point in this guy's house? What would the tax position be? What would the tax position be in terms of like replenishing his miles, you know, that he normally gets repaid by the company? What would the position be there? And a lot of people are looking to the government to say, can you clear all this sort of thicket of problems out the way so that my decisions are a lot simpler? I can see a clear way forward. And when it comes to the big hikes in energy prices, that just makes one more obstacle on the way.
Okay, Andrew, I wonder whether you want to comment on that, both on the energy prices bit there, but also on what Martin mentioned there about some of the new administrative hurdles that are happening as we change technologies, for example, there on the sort of tax position of EVs versus conventional vehicles.
Yeah, Martin makes a good point. I mean, the best role of government, because you know the cost of energy are global. They're like lots of commodities that businesses, big and small, rely on. I was encouraged a little bit yesterday to see that some of the producer price index of inflation was starting to fall, and hopefully that's a lead indicator from a macro perspective, because it's incredibly hard. You know, the things that business need most are confidence and certainty, and when you do have these supply squeezes, both of those things are impacted. So we need to get through that as quickly as possible. But Martin's point about, you know, can we simplify? Can we look at opportunities that when businesses invest, for example, that they don't immediately get an increase in their business rates? That is something I know that the government is looking at to give businesses the support that they need in making this transition. And then my final point is just, again, you know, let's look at the opportunity sizes. Sustainability it's a doing word, right? I mean, it should infect all parts of the business, and you want businesses to be the best sustainable businesses are more resilient. So on a macro level, as you know, Ed, you know, the government's investing in nuclear, it's adding to our renewable capacity. The brilliant thing about that renewable capacity is it's domestic. We increase the proportion of self-sufficiency in energy. That's been underinvested, you know, over many, many years. We're not going to be able to turn on this new capacity overnight, although great strides are being made in, for example, things like wind technology. We'll get to a world where, you know, the government, the sort of responsibility from the macro perspective, does provide good, reliable, clean domestic energy, which should be a brilliant, empowering, you know, foundation stone for businesses to be able to focus on other things. And I'm very, very empathetic at the moment to the challenges of businesses, particularly small businesses, dealing with lots of inbound at the same time. I get that, and anything the government can do, as it did during the pandemic, to demonstrate that it's on the side of business is clearly all to the good.
And do you think some of this is about access to capital? So, for example, if energy bills are going up, one way to overcome that in the medium term is to reduce your energy usage through energy efficiency measures, which might be sort of expensive up front but have savings. So is there something the government can do there?
There's lots already happening in terms of both the super deduction for those businesses making substantial investments in different types of plant and different types of technology. That is available. It's the biggest ever tax cut in history. But also, I know from a local perspective that things like in general, your local enterprise partnership, the LEPs as they're called across the country, most of those have schemes. Some excellent schemes in Sussex and the southeast, whereby businesses can apply for grants of up to £5,000 to invest in precisely this sort of technology. And innovation is our friend. Every day we're coming across better use of smart meters, of battery storage to arbitrage the cost of energy at different times. There are firms new entrepreneurs making businesses out of this, out of bringing that technology. I don't think you can get you probably can, but as a sign of success, a solar installer in the southeast of England, I suspect they've all got very, very full order books as people look to take advantage of the real progress that's been made in the effectiveness and reduction in the price of photovoltaic. I know it's not for everybody, but that's just an example or an anecdote of how we can all do more.
Great. So I do want to come on to heating at some point, but I'll just take a couple of questions from our virtual audience now. So Professor Peter Styring from the University of Sheffield, can you unmute and join us?
Yeah, unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Excellent, thank you. So thanks to Policy Exchange for hosting this excellent event and for the contributors. Having looked at the 10-point Green Industrial Revolution plan, it's an ambition rather than true legislation. Now, my worry for small businesses is that while big businesses can buy into things like CCS, etc., how is that going to work for small businesses? We were told by Alok Sharma yesterday that we were looking at 20 megatons per annum carbon capture by, I think it was 2030. That's more than the current global capacity at the moment. In Britain, we don't have a pipeline. If I'm an engineering company in the centre of England, how do I decarbonise using CCS when the infrastructure doesn't exist?
Okay, great. Thank you. So, yeah, question there about how do we turn the ambition into action? I mean, Martin, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think there are two areas that I'd focus on. One is, I know you're coming on to it later, is heating buildings. I think there's an area where there's a very clear ambition for the government to invest in heat pumps, or they want people to invest in heat pumps. But unless they help in a more significant way to generate that market and get it over the early growth stages, I don't think it will ever succeed. It's definitely stalled right now, and it has a massive opportunity for lots of small installers. So that's one of the things. I think Peter's right, that the 10-point plan was high on ambition and not a lot of detail. And I think there needs to be a lot more support on simple things like how you would heat buildings. The second thing is about CCS. I know that if you take small ceramics manufacturers, high energy consumers, and they could, in theory, use a CCS system, but they're scattered all over the UK. It's not going to be possible unless they relocate to carry on supporting that industry. So what's the solution if you've got an industry that's so disparate and spread around the UK when it can't take advantage of CCS?
Okay, great. So a lot of talk there about carbon capture and storage, CCS. Eva, I'll come to you now. Is there some sense that this is easier for big businesses? You talked about renewable energy, procurement, for example. You kind of need a big balance sheet to do that. I guess that's more of a challenge for smaller businesses here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I can't speak to CCS now on behalf of Meta, but I think generally we take the approach that we have much broader opportunities than SMEs have. So while we obviously, as I mentioned initially, we want to be good citizen and reduce our own footprint and make sure that we use what we have to not or to reduce our footprint altogether. But then obviously with the tools and with the power and the resources that we have, we feel that we have a responsibility to also transfer that and make that knowledge available to others and make sure that we use our infrastructure to inform people. Because maybe it's slightly going into a different direction now, but I think when we talk about climate change, I think we do have some type of climate communication crisis too. And I think this is very important to understand that a lot of people, and not only individuals, but I think societies altogether, they have a huge lack of knowledge around the specifics of climate and also how it's being communicated, how the crisis is being communicated is very, can be misleading or can be tricky. So I think there is a challenge for those who would like to address the issue to make sure that we sort of try to make sure that everyone has a basic and correct understanding of what he and she can do, what his or her role can be as an individual or as a company. And I think this is, again, an area where we as a platform have a huge lever to provide that type of information. And when I say provide that information, I'm not talking about us as Meta providing information, but using our platform and the infrastructure to allow others to deliver that messages and to deliver those information. And maybe just a final remark to that point is, as an example, what we've done about 1.5 years ago, we started with a Climate Science Center, which is an individual hub on our platform on Facebook itself, where we provide authoritative information. We work with the UN, EP, with the IPCC, and also local partners, including the UK, where we work, for example, with the Met Office, or no, I want to say what we work with them, but we provide content from them on the Climate Science Center, and we continuously try to drive people to that hub and make that content available so people really know what they need to know to also take the right decision and then take climate action ultimately within their own remit.
Thanks, Eva. Andrew, I wonder if I can come to you both on that general question of turning the 10-point plan into action, and then perhaps specifically on carbon capture and storage, as to whether you see a role, or what you see the role as for hubs of industrial activity, and does this mean that these high emitting businesses are going to have to sort of concentrate in geographical areas?
Yeah. Well, the 10-point plan is absolutely right. It's a set of very high level plans, and it's the role of private sector working hand by hand with government, and there's subsequently been a whole series of consultations of work plans down at a sector level. So I mean, I tend to think of that as the sort of chapter headings of the overall book, and then if you look subsequently, because that document's it's over a year old, it's 15 months old now, and predated COP, you've then got things like the decarbonisation of transport strategy, the hydrogen strategy paper, that are actually more about turning those into a set of series of actions and detailed plans. There's a lot that happens at the system level, and the good news for small business is that largely, that's an underpin. If at a system level we're introducing hydrogen as a fuel, we're putting in the infrastructure around that, carbon capture and storage, which is a heavy engineering solution to reducing climate. That is all decarbonising the overall grid. So, every day that you're consuming your electricity, you can now rely on the fact that about half of that is coming from clean, renewable energy. And that's happening semi-magically, while you sleep. So if you are a small business owner, then that's just taken care of for you. And it forms part of your own supply chain and your own carbon footprint. Similarly in aviation, aviation is often one of the parts of people's supply chain. If you do go through that exercise of mapping out your carbon footprint, transport is a big domain. So that the parts you control directly, you can choose to have an EV or reduce the volume of transport. Big domains like marine and aviation may well end up as part of your carbon footprint, even in a small business. And you need to work on those at a system level, which the government is doing with initiatives in those two sectors. I mean, I think there'll be a bit of clustering around carbon capture and storage, but again, it is a system level solution. So one of the applications of that would be potentially the production of hydrogen, the carbon that is extracted in the process of creating cleaner hydrogen. Again, that then may be a fuel that's dispersed across the whole country. So I don't think, you know, we will support some of our big industrial clusters, existing industrial clusters in that, but everyone will benefit is my sort of argument and take on it.
Great, thanks Andrew. And I might just plug Policy Exchange's work calling for a zero emission vehicle mandate, which forms actually one of the chapters that Andrew's talking there about there around the decarbonisation of transport. And we're expecting the government to put forward some regulations on that in the next couple of months, which will be very exciting. So now, Tony Ackroyd, the former director of the Association of Independent Businesses. Can you unmute and join us, please?
Hello, good morning. And can I add my thanks and appreciation of the really excellent input from the three contributors? There's some very, very interesting material here. As you say, I was former director of AIB, representing about 12,500 businesses, and also contracted by the Westminster government to help develop standards for national business counselling and management for SMEs. My question is about one element of current policy which I believe is economically and technically misplaced, but realignment of it could be a huge support to the SME sector. The question is, how far can the government improve support for SMEs by reallocating the 1 billion of annual subsidy for large-scale forest bioenergy production, which actually has higher net emissions, carbon emissions, than the fossil fuels it is supposed to replace. That's more than twice the level, by the way, of gas emissions. Reallocate that subsidy to genuine alternative renewables, insulation and recycling, where there are major growth opportunities for SME involvement.
Okay, thank you, Toby. We lost you a tiny bit there, but the question was about the role of bioenergy subsidies and whether or not that could be redirected to small businesses. That's Andrew, I don't know if you want to come in on that one, and maybe I can open up with a slightly broader question to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, thank you. Look, not huge domain knowledge from me, I'm afraid, on the specific subsidies. I mean, there are lots of different economics in this. Directionally, one wants to see more of the support for the energy production sector or for capital to be in two places. One is those that have an end-to-end low carbon footprint, and sometimes there's been a debate in the past about where the two ends of those are, but clearly as the science develops, you want to look at the whole life cost of creating energy or products. And secondly, the best place I always find for government is leveraging the early days. Now that can be, you know, a bit of pump priming to put the infrastructure in place. You know, in some areas it's just as simple as making sure if you're trying to create a gigafactory that you can get the grid connection, because they consume vast amounts of electricity. So it's all very well saying we're going to have a gigafactory, but if you can't connect that to the grid, then that doesn't work. So that's a piece of infrastructure support. It can be getting, as we're seeing at the moment in with Jet Zero in aviation, you know, there are lots of brilliant technologies, some of which will work, some won't. So it's a high risk endeavor. And historically, high risk research has been a big domain for government to play in. So not only are we increasing the overall amount spent on science, but we've also got lots of accelerators devoted to this area that are helping to fund science into innovation and deployment that would never otherwise happen. And you see that again very well in aviation, where the government's just, you know, helped Rolls-Royce, you know, power the fastest ever electric plane. You know, from here on, it will scale, and we'll see where that goes. And the final thing I would point, and I think this is a point of real benefit to small businesses in general, is far more than its direct spend on things like research or grant schemes and all of those things that often come with quite a lot of paperwork and red tape, which we don't like. Far more significant of that is government as a procurer. You know, we spend, I think, £960 billion a year of direct spending that's procurable. And if we can even tilt that, we don't have to go all the way, but if we can tilt that to those firms that are doing great work in sustainability, as well as in general, and I know this is a huge barrier and a fight that the FSB and others have long engaged in, is making sure there's fair dibs for small businesses in that procurement. So, you know, getting rid of those simple things like that classic, you know, we need 3 years of trading history. But if you're a young disruptive startup bringing some terrific new innovation to market that's going to help make us all more productive and sustainable, then the fact that you weren't trading 3 years ago is neither here nor there. And so that's a really good example of where the government can boost the economy. And bluntly, there's more work that needs to be done on that. And I think the government's bringing forward a procurement bill in the coming years.
Great. And Martin, seeing as FSB was name-checked there by Andrew, I thought I'd bring you in on that, around some of the procurement issues, particularly in procurement of green technologies, given what we're talking about today.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to cheer Andrew on there. I mean, they are clearly things that we agree completely with Andrew's characterization of the problem, that sometimes government creates procurement systems which really end up making it very difficult for small and innovative companies to trade with them. And I think the lower, the more you can remove those barriers, the better. But coming back to the original question, which I think is about, should we be smarter about how we use subsidies? I mean, one area that jumps out at me is that instead of sort of picking technology winners, which always seems like it's going to be a mistake. For example, there's a lot of focus on heat pumps. If you take a rural area, and we've got big areas where heat pump technology simply won't work. You know, if you're out in a drafty building a long way from a power supply, then providing a heat pump is not going to be the solution. So what you should be then doing is supporting new, innovative technologies that can fill that gap. There are plenty out there. There are plenty of small businesses that can do it, but don't get fixated on one technology, and don't therefore plow lots of government resource into propping up something that could have serious shortcomings.
Great. I'm just going to come to the next question. I'll put the question to Eva. So Helen Bates, Managing Director of Time Associates, can you come off mute and join us, please?
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
We can, Helen. Thank you.
Thanks. No, the question I posed there was really on the back of something Andrew said a few moments ago. Andrew, you mentioned reducing the volume of transport, and I know there's this government strategy to spend something like 27 billion on new road building. So I wondered if it kind of flies in the face of what you're saying there. Could you say a bit more there? What we've talked about today is supporting small businesses to develop their sustainability strategies and so on. And surely that sort of investment will be better spent in helping companies do that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Helen. I'll just come to Eva first there on the more general point around local businesses and connecting local businesses with local customers.
Sorry, I didn't hear that question. Can you repeat?
Sort of, what's the key here in terms of making sure that local businesses can find local customers to reduce, the transport emissions that are involved in some products in particular?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think Andrew had a great example in his opening remarks around how it's helped SMEs to find suppliers from within the region. I think you can actually do both. You can find your local customers very easily, and therefore, obviously, you can reduce shipping, etc. but also the other way around. You can find your local businesses on a platform. And I think it's very often, I mean, there's two sides of this. The way you can market on Facebook actually allows you to address people all over the planet. So it might well be that you find new customers elsewhere. But I think the local component, we've seen, for example, from the example I've had before, the farm next door that really ship from the local farmers to the local customers. I think that's a business that's super clear and hyper local. And those are certainly also some that we particularly try to support. There's actually another one from London that's called Otsu. They call themselves a vegan-friendly and plant-based breakfast brand with a focus on locally sourced ingredients and sustainable packaging. And I think for sustainable, conscious people, those are very often the exact right information that they need to make the choices, as there is a high awareness across that, and they will have the opportunity, that company has the opportunity to find their local customers through exactly our tools on the platform. And just again to show how that translates into positive business, that just called company Otsu, they say they have had a 50% increase of sales through Instagram, and also another 50% new traffic on their website through Instagram. So I think that's another very good example how you as a very locally focused company can still increase your business with the help of some digital tools such as Instagram.
Thanks, Eva. And Andrew, I guess that there is a tension here between allowing or sort of facilitating sort of higher emission activities and trying to reach net zero overall. It's clearly a very controversial topic when we talk about trying to reduce demand for goods and services that people enjoy, like transport. What's the balance that the government's trying to strike here?
Well, the way of reconciling those two things is new technology. I mean, in general, if we're going to deliver the hopes and ambitions of everybody, as well as make sure everybody's part of this journey, right? This can't be about elites. This can't be about, just top-down telling. It needs to be a proper revolution that affects and is supported by every part of society. And the way you do those is technology and productivity. At the end of the day, how do you best protect the environment? And it's not just number of atoms of carbon, it's biodiversity, it's people's backyards, it's wildlife, it's the threat to wildlife that we already face even in the UK, not just in a rainforest somewhere in the world. You reconcile those two things by better use of the world's resources. So it is at its heart, this is why it comes back very often to technology companies. It is a data optimization issue. So I think I was asked about roads, and I just think it's a false dichotomy to say you shouldn't build new roads. The zero emission vehicles that will come forward with, certainly at the tailpipe level, will need to travel on roads. If we're going to make the best optimal use of resources, often that does involve an element of transportation. The worst thing of all is congestion, right? Congestion is wholly unproductive. It reduces the ability of the economy to invest in the low carbon transition, and it's producing all sorts of pollutants along the way to no good end. So if a new road, a bypass, a remapped junction can eliminate some congestion, just as the sharing economy optimizes uses of exactly the same assets. Cars typically, sit idle most of the day. If you can use a different model, like some technology companies, cars as a service, modern metropolitan car sharing things, they're just making better use of the world's resources. And we can all do that. I mean, I always say to small businesses, the first step on your journey to a low carbon world, because it's often all of those things that we know we should do. We should turn off the lights at night. We should turn down the thermostat a few notches. And these are things that don't cost any money. Indeed, they even save money. So the things that we sort of all know we should do, reduce waste, cut down on packaging, travel a little bit less if we can, and take simple steps. They may be baby steps. They can add up if we all do them. They can add up to a significant benefit, but they also save businesses money.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Martin, I don't know whether this is a specialist area of yours, but one idea to lower emissions is through shifting the transport of goods from, say, lorries onto trains or something like that. And you can imagine big businesses finding that relatively sort of makes sense. They can fill up a whole train with their goods that they move from A to B, potentially more of a challenge for small businesses. Is this something that you and your members have looked at?
Yeah, I mean, every time we talk to our members about their main concerns on transport, it doesn't come back to planes and trains. It is really about road transport. And I think what we've learned from the COVID crisis is that having a more resilient, a more sustainable supply chain makes really good business sense. And a lot of big corporates now are thinking, well, look, rather than shipping product from halfway around the world, which is both in terms of sustainability is not a good idea, and also makes them very vulnerable should there be a shock in the transport system, they are getting their supply chain much closer to home. Now, I think ultimately that will be good for everybody involved, and it will certainly mean that a lot of small businesses can thrive. They have the resources to innovate. So, I think there is a lot of good that can come out of this, but roads will play a central part in making sure that's effective.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I think we've got time for one more question. So Andrew Rainford from the voluntary sector in the Northwest. Can you unmute and join us?
Yeah, thanks. This is sort of speaking in a personal capacity, really, and the question's prompted by Martin's comment about heat pumps. The scheme is capped at 30,000 installations per year for the next 3 years. We've got a major project at home and could be installation number 29,999. Equally so, we could be installation number 30,001. How do we do the financial planning for this, and how do we encourage others to plan for uncertainty?
Great. So, Martin, let's throw it back to you because you want to talk about heat pumps. What are the pluses and minuses of the current approach the government's taking?
Well, I think the problem is that the debate has all been about the cost of the heat pump itself. And the reality is nobody's going to switch to a heat pump unless they can do a lot more in terms of insulation in the home. And there are significant additional investments you're going to have to make in pipe work, header tanks, new radiators. I think the government needs to be very straight with people that this isn't going to be about getting rid of a boiler that costs you $3,000 and putting in a heat pump that maybe costs you $5,000. This could cost you £30,000 or £40,000, especially for a drafty home. And I think once that's recognised, then we've got a much more realistic conversation about how we can make that market work. Right now, it seems to be locked in some sort of fantasy land about exactly what will work and what won't work.
Okay, I'll come to Andrew in a second, but Eva, you mentioned you work with all sorts of different businesses and you gave some sectors there. Is heating and cooling something that they are thinking about in terms of their sustainability objectives?
So we have kicked off the program by addressing the hospitality, the restaurant, and the food producing industries. As said, those were the 3 ones we picked because we felt they were particularly affected through the crisis. We are currently looking into how we can further expand that program. And when we do so, we try to look at the areas where we can create the biggest impact of our engagement. So I can see a variety of different sectors where that type of cooperation and support can be efficient. If we end up in the cooling and heating space, I think that certainly, I can imagine that. Although I would assume, for example, that for those areas, they are quite aware already of the role that they play, we might actually end up looking at other areas and other sectors that might not be so conscious about where they can actually support by reducing their footprint. But this, I don't want to commit to anything right now, but just saying how we're generally approaching that, but by really trying to see how we can maximize the impact of that type of program.
Great. And Andrew Griffith, final word to you.
Yeah, look, in heating and energy use, I think that we're very early days, right? I mean, the first wasn't the first sort of supercomputer the size of a warehouse and cost billions of pounds. And now I'm talking to you certainly on my iPhone that for a much smaller amount of money is connecting me to the entire connected world. So a lot of these technologies, probably aren't ready for prime time right now. It's good that governments and the private sector experiment. That is how we optimize. That's how things improve by sending signals, demand signals about the direction of travel, which is very clear. There's no ambiguity about the direction of travel. Right now, there'll be firms coming in, putting capital, trying to scale up the volume of solutions, and the cost will come down very significantly. But I do want to, because it always ends up in a sort of fairly narrow, dead-end cul-de-sac about one heat pump or not. I mean, Martin's bigger point earlier is the right one, which is it shouldn't be about a particular technology. Some things will be very productive, some things won't be able to be deployed in the way that people hope. But the role of government is to sketch out the direction of travel, which I think is very clear. The fact we're having this conversation today means, this is rising up the radar of firms and people in positions of influence. And then we will see a dynamic market-based solution. This is why I always think, completely the wrong answer, and I don't think anyone's advocated it here today, is to sort of stick a spoke in the bicycle, of capitalism and say we're not going to benefit from all of the things that have lifted billions of people out of poverty, have created wonderful innovation, have found a solution to the virus. We need to harness all of this wonderful, productive human capital and innovation to solve these issues. And I remain very optimistic and bullish that we can do that.
Great, thank you, Andrew. That seems like a good spot to end. I'd just like to thank our panel, to Andrew, to Martin, and to Eva for joining us, and for all of you who've joined us today as part of our virtual audience. If you've missed any of this event, you can watch it back on the Policy Exchange website and through all of our social media channels. And please do subscribe to the Policy Exchange mailing list so that you don't miss any future events. Thank you very much and goodbye.